Hi, this is Brian with Team Skelegore from Central New York, and today we're taking a deep dive into rating special effects, and we're going to talk about different scenarios we might encounter while considering this topic and how each part plays into different scenes. We'll also talk about specific ratings in each area for a better reference. So with that, let's get into it. What are special effects? When we talk about special effects as a rating category, we're referring to everything that is inside of an attraction minus the actors and their costumes. This is everything from sound and lighting design to props and set pieces to practical effects like fog and air blowers. The main areas we consider while rating special effects are sound effects, creative and original props and effects, detail, suspension of disbelief, and effective effects. So let's talk about sound effects. Were there any areas of dead silence? And if so, did it help promote creepiness or uneasiness, or was it just a boring area? Dead silence can be a useful tool if the scene is building suspense for a larger scare or it's using the silence to force more attention on the visuals. The use of silence is hard to do effectively, and it almost needs to be deafening to be a strong use case. Did they provide an ambient soundtrack? And if so, was it loud and disorienting or low volume and suspenseful? Loud and disorienting can be a great tool to have in a bright or chaotic room, but this can also be used incorrectly where an actor is supposed to be making a noise and becomes drowned out by the sounds. Low volume can be used in the opposite way where an actor is making noises that the patron should be hearing. Lower volume can be used to good effect in a room where other things are going on and the ambient track is intended to be in the background. For example, in a laboratory scene, the whirring of gadgets and computers, or an echoey footstep sort of track in a dungeon scene. The soundtrack itself should also make sense here. The sound of a monster growling nearby doesn't make a whole lot of sense in a scene that's built to look abandoned or otherwise empty. There should almost always be a visual correlation, and your brain is going to know when something doesn't quite add up. And how well did the sounds work? Were they annoying and repetitive, or did they help intensify the experience? One of the things we like to look out for here are seamless loops and realistic sounds. Hearing when a loop starts and stops breaks the immersion, as well as hastily produced sounds that would benefit from more polishing to fit the source. Repetitive sounds can work, for example, a dog barking, but it shouldn't be the same barking sound over and over and over again. It should be fluid and realistic. Let's talk about scoring sound effects. 1 to 3 means there's little to no sound or very contrasting sounds to the scene that they're in. And the area might be very boring or unsuspenseful. It's going to leave a lot to be desired. A 4 to 6 means there are sounds where there should be, and the volume levels are quite appropriate. The specific sounds might get a little repetitive or noticeably unrealistic for the source, though. Think about thunder in an outdoor scene, but there's no other indication of a storm in the area. And a 7 to 10 means that the sounds are perfectly or very closely matched to their source at appropriate volume levels. Ambient tracks will add considerable value to the scene, and they're going to create a sense of fullness for the rest of the scene. Now let's talk about creativity and originality. The first thing is, are there unaltered off-the-shelf props? Or did the haunt create them in-house? And so usually while walking through a haunt, you can see the props that came straight from Spirit the day before. And sometimes it works. Ideally, we like to see customized props that fit into the scene rather than things that look nice, but they're not really at home. A good example of this might be a hammer that's been weathered to look like it's been used in a grisly murder. Whereas a shiny new framing hammer from Home Depot fills the role functionally, but it's not really dressed the part. Props do need to be dressed up just like the actors. How much creativity was invested in them? Were they well detailed and highly functional, or were they cobbled together at the last minute? This is an area where sometimes a raggedy looking prop that was slapped together can sometimes work if it's in the right place. But usually we like to see props that look horror pretty. That is to say, a voodoo doll prop shouldn't look like a child made it, but rather a voodoo priestess. I like to see props that are more hero quality throughout a scene, meaning that the prop has all the right markings and uses when you can get up close to it. When it comes to effects, a vortex tunnel looks great, but what illusion is the haunt trying to create? The standard effect is an endless tunnel, but other uses can be a sense of ascending or descending in elevation, which is not used as often. Or perhaps the idea is to make a certain space feel larger or smaller than it really is, such as using a claustrophobia tunnel with airbags to lightly squeeze the patron as they walk through. And finally, do they use things you haven't seen before? Now, this will be something that you know when you see it. Sometimes an item catches your eye and makes you think about if you've ever seen anything like that before. A great example of this might be the moving room effect at Demon Acres in Hannibal, New York. After guests are herded into the first scene, they're told to sit on a couch, and the lights will go out, and the couch slides over to the next scene for a pretty seamless transition. Unaltered props can work sometimes. This is the source photo for my team logo, which was shot in a graveyard with off the shelf props. Everything in this photo, except for the headstone, is off the shelf and unaltered. The large skull on the right was purchased from the Christmas tree shop about 5 years ago. The candelabra, candles, small skull, and tarot cards are all unaltered off the shelf objects. The point is that not everything needs to be completely customized, and it comes down to more about how it's used rather than what is used. Now let's talk about scoring originality. A 1 to 3 means there's totally off the shelf props and effects that don't fit the scene at all. There might be a total lack of props or effects to fill the set. The items used will not look the part or will be severely underutilized. Effects will be low effort and may or may not enhance the scene in any way. A 4 to 6 means that props might still be off the shelf, but they're going to be more appropriate for the scene. They still won't feel totally at home, and they're going to need more weathering and detailing to fit correctly. Effects will generally be a little bit higher end, but they're not going to add a lot of it. A 7 to 10 means that props will be mostly or entirely customized, and they're going to feel as though they came directly from a haunted estate. Effects will be original and custom tailored to the scene, and the effects will also add considerable value and depth to the scene. The two main things we look for when it comes to scene detail are: did some rooms seem to be thrown together quickly? And could you tell what each area was supposed to be? While it is true that some scenes do not require days or weeks to build, you're going to know when you're in a scene that was put together at the last possible moment. The overall aesthetic won't match the rest of the haunt, the set pieces won't look finished, and it's not going to sell the illusion. One of the things I like to look for are black walls with party decorations scattered around the room. This is usually an indication of a last minute build, and you won't feel like you're anywhere in particular. On the other hand, some shows, such as Blackout New York City, have used barren walls to create sensory deprivation, making the patron more vulnerable to something that's not traditionally scary. This, however, is very uncommon. And as far as telling where you're supposed to be, this is going to be something where you know it when you see it. You can figure out based on the set that you're in 17th century London or you're in a haunted estate. But sometimes it's not as easy to figure out, and the supposed location is quite vague. An example of this might be an attraction where guests enter, and for the first few minutes, there's no decoration. There's no props, there's no actors, there's no nothing to give any indication of where you're supposed to be. And then suddenly, a large slide, like the one you might see at a carnival. Again, this is one where you know it when you see it. Let's talk about scoring detail. A 1 to 3 means there's little to no detail in the room to create a sense of location or theme. Decorations will be obviously off the shelf, kitschy Halloween decorations, things you might get for a party. Think about those cardboard skeleton cutouts that you tack up on the wall for a week. There's going to be little to no attempt to dress the scene in any real meaningful way. A 4 to 6 means there's some attempt made at dressing the scene to fit the particular location, but the decorations will still feel cheap and they'll match the aesthetic, but not in any real meaningful way. A 7 to 9 means a lot of work and attention has gone into the details to create a realistic looking set. Decorations will all be in theme, the aesthetic will be consistent, and all high quality. A 10, this is rare, but it means I've traveled through time to 17th century London. Remember, that's very rare. Suspension of disbelief. Could you tell that anything was fake? How well did they produce an immersive and completely realistic experience? During the original props and effects section, I mentioned that a voodoo doll should look like it was made by a voodoo priestess. This comes into play here as well. Not only do the props need to be hero quality, the sets need to be screen ready, so to speak. As soon as a patron can distinguish between an actual murder scene and the one created for a haunt, some level of immersion is broken. My favorite cliche prop is the very large, obviously fake spider that's everywhere. Sometimes they're rigged to move in some way, other times it's a static prop, but never once have I thought, wow, that gigantic spider is so real. Were there any exposed fog machines, extension cords, water bottles, cell phones, etc. to remind you of the outside world? This is going to come down to judgment and figuring out where to draw the line on what's acceptable. And it's a lot easier to forgive a dark colored speaker tucked away in a corner rather than tripping over the cables coming out of it because there was no attempt made to hide it. The same goes for extension cables, fog machines, anything else that needs to be plugged in. Some effort needs to be made to hide them away. Fog machines specifically should not show an obvious location, but rather fog should be dispersed evenly throughout the scene. Cell phones and water bottle sightings are automatic no-goes, and they should not be visible at all at any time. Were there any major bottlenecks that caused several groups of customers to catch up to each other? This is getting into specific layout of scenes and sets. If a scene is cluttered and has any sort of choke points, you can expect conga lines to start forming on busy nights. The ideal spacing at any given point should be about wide enough for two average sized adults to walk side by side without getting stuck somewhere. While this does come at the cost of not being able to single out patrons for more intense and individualized scares, it prevents the bunching up. College girls are especially notorious for slowing down to make sure they haven't lost their friends or boyfriend or whoever and causing that backup. Were there any unnatural transitions? Did you see any actor passageways that should have been hidden? This is right in line with extension cords, fog machines, and speakers. If your actor boxes and passageways are wide open, patrons will go into them. Another thing to avoid are open walls between scenes. It kills the immersion when a dungeon scene is visible from something entirely unrelated. On the other hand, some guests will still try to walk through solid walls. It's unavoidable, but a good effort needs to be made on the part of the haunt to conceal these areas. And finally, was there anything that really didn't contribute to the experience very well? We all know when we see useless props or effects, it's the loud as hell electrical popper box that goes off in your ear and only contributes to your tinnitus. It's the creepy looking doll in the chainsaw scene. It's the animatronic that looked so cool at the trade show, but really doesn't have a place in the haunt. These things can all serve a purpose, but they all need to be in the right places. I like to apply Chekhov's gun to this area. The premise is that if a rifle is placed on a shelf in Act 1, it needs to go off in Act 2. Calling attention to a prop or effect needs to have purpose, or else it becomes a MacGuffin, or a device that has become significant to the plot but is insignificant in itself. Let's talk about scoring suspension of disbelief now. A 1 to 3 means there's little or no realistic props. Cell phones, extension cords, water bottles, etc. will be visible in several scenes. Many choke points are creating backups. Guests may wander into actor areas or see into other scenes. Many props will not be useful to the scene that they're in. A 4 to 6, about half or a little more than half of the scenes will have visible items. More than one or two choke points will happen throughout. Guests will still wander into actor areas, but will not likely be able to see into the other scenes. Props will be more appropriate for the scenes, but they'll still be inconsequential. A 7 to 10 means there's no visible items where there shouldn't be. A maximum of one or two choke points throughout the entire attraction, and guests will not be able to access actor areas whatsoever. Props will be consequential and essential to the scene. And effective effects. Did everything work together to provide a scary and or entertaining experience? This is the final section of special effects, and the only thing we're looking at is the entertainment value of the effects as a whole. We're looking to see a fulfilling experience from the sets, scenes, props, effects, and accessibility of the entire attraction. The scoring on this is fairly simple, so let's jump right into it. 1 to 3 means that I want my money back. The overall entertainment value did not coincide with the haunt's claims or standards above a kid-friendly haunt. A 4 to 6 means that the haunt is making an effort to provide decent quality special effects, but is falling short on execution. Or execution might be fine, but the props are low quality. And a 7 to 10 means I just visited a Hollywood set. The effects are all top quality, and the execution and timing is all spot on. Remember, this is just a guide. Use your own judgment, and most of all, have fun. It's why you're there. Thank you.